At my daughter's engagement dinner, my son-in-law-to-be leaned over and murmured to his mother, "He still doesn't know, right?" I wasn't supposed to hear it. But 40 years of running factory floors trains your ears to catch the one voice that matters in a room full of noise. I set my wine glass down slowly and kept my face perfectly still. What I found out over the next 3 weeks would end with federal agents walking into my own dining room, and it would cost me the son I raised and the daughter I thought I knew. My name is Walter Nash. I'm 68 years old, and for 39 years I built Nash Precision Tooling from a rented garage in Ohio into a company that supplies parts to half the auto manufacturers in the Midwest. My wife, Diane, and I did not come from money. We came from nothing, and we built something, brick by brick, overtime shift by overtime shift. Our daughter, Emily, was our whole world. We paid for her nursing degree. We paid for her wedding dress fitting appointments before she'd even found a groom. And when she finally brought home Preston Cole, a smooth-talking real estate developer from Columbus, we welcomed him the way we welcomed everything in our family, completely and without reservation. Preston asked me for Emily's hand on a Sunday afternoon in our backyard, and I said yes before he'd even finished the sentence. Diane cried. I shook his hand so hard he winced. 3 months later, we were sitting at Cole family's Italian restaurant of choice, celebrating the engagement with Preston's mother, Vivian, and a table full of their friends. And that's when I heard it. He still doesn't know, right? I looked over at Preston. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his mother, Vivian, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who ran some kind of consulting business I'd never fully understood, and Vivian was nodding at him with a small, satisfied smile, the kind of smile you give someone when a plan is going exactly as designed. I looked at Emily. She was laughing at something on her phone, oblivious. I looked back at my linguine, and I said nothing. That night, driving home, Diane asked me why I was so quiet. I am a man who solves problems, not a man who panics. So I told her I was just tired, but I wasn't tired. I was doing what I've done for 4 decades every time a supplier's numbers didn't add up. I was running the math in my head, over and over, looking for where it broke. 2 weeks earlier, Preston had pitched me on an investment. He called it the opportunity of a lifetime. He and Vivian were developing a boutique retail plaza just outside Dayton, 12 storefronts, anchor tenants already lined up, projected to be worth $11 million once it was fully leased. He needed capital partners to close on the land before another buyer swooped in. He showed me renderings. He showed me a spreadsheet with return projections that made my eyes widen despite myself. I wired him $800,000 as my stake in the project. Structured, he told me, as a limited partnership with my name directly on the deed alongside his and Vivian's company. It was supposed to be a wedding gift and an investment in one, a way to give Emily and Preston a real financial foundation as they started their life together. That was the story, anyway. That was what I believed, right up until I heard 4 words across a dinner table that didn't belong to me. I did not confront Preston that night. I did not confront him the next morning, either. I am not a man who swings first. I am a man who finds out exactly what he's swinging at. So the following Monday, instead of going into my own office at Nash Precision, I drove to the Montgomery County Recorder's office and requested the deed records for the parcel Preston had shown me in his glossy presentation. It took the clerk 11 minutes to pull the file. The property was real. The address matched. But the ownership entity did not say Cole Development Partners, like Preston's paperwork claimed. It said Rosewood Strategic Holdings LLC, registered in Delaware, with a single managing member listed, Vivian J. Cole. My name was nowhere on it. Preston's name was nowhere on it. $800,000 of my money had gone somewhere, but it had not gone into that land, and it had certainly not gone into any partnership with my name attached. I sat in my truck in the parking lot of that recorder's office for a long time before I turned the key. I did not tell Diane that night either. I needed her reaction, when the moment came, to be real, not rehearsed. Because I have learned something in 4 decades of business. The moment you tip your hand, smart people start covering their tracks, and Vivian struck me as a very smart woman. So I went home, I ate dinner, I complimented Diane's pot roast, and I went to bed at my regular hour, staring at the ceiling until I heard her breathing turn slow and even beside me. At 2 in the morning I got up. I went down to my home office, the same room where I'd drafted the original business plan for Nash Precision on a legal pad back when Emily was still in diapers, and I opened my laptop. I am not a technology man by nature, but I am a stubborn one, and I had spent the last 2 weeks quietly teaching myself how to read corporate filings, how to trace an LLC back through registered agents, how to pull UCC financing statements. What I found kept me up until dawn. Rosewood Strategic Holdings wasn't a real estate company. It was a shell, 4 months old, with no employees, no office, and no other assets besides the parcel of land Preston had shown me pictures of. But Vivian's name appeared on 6 other LLCs registered in the same window of time, all of them thin as paper, all of them threaded together through the same registered agent in Wilmington. And every single one of them had received wire transfers in the exact same window that mine had gone out. Different amounts, different sources, but the same pattern, over and over. I was not her only investor. I was one of several. I called an old friend the next morning, a man named Harold Greer, who'd spent 30 years as a forensic accountant before he retired, the kind of man who still can't help himself when he smells something rotten in a balance sheet. I told him what I'd found. I asked him to help me quietly. Off the books, no paperwork, nothing that would tip anyone off. Harold agreed before I'd even finished asking. It took him 9 days to build the full picture, and every night during those 9 days, I sat across the dinner table from my daughter's fiancé and I smiled, and I asked him how the Plaza project was coming along, and he told me lies with the easy confidence of a man who had never once been caught at anything in his life. "We're ahead of schedule, Walter," he told me one Thursday night, pouring himself a glass of my good bourbon without asking. "Mom's got the anchor tenant signed. We're looking at breaking ground by spring." He said it while looking me directly in the eye. I nodded and told him that was wonderful news, and I meant every word of my performance, because Harold had texted me 2 hours earlier that the Rosewood account had just wired $41,000 to an address in Scottsdale, Arizona, that had nothing to do with any retail plaza. Emily, for her part, believed every syllable of it. She'd started picking out venues for the wedding. She'd started talking about how proud she was that her fiancé and his mother were building something real, something that would set them all up for life, unlike, she said once without thinking, some of Dad's old-fashioned factory stuff. I didn't say anything. I just refilled her water glass. Harold's final report came in on a Sunday night, and it was worse than anything I had let myself imagine. Vivian Cole was not a real estate developer. She had run this exact scheme twice before under different company names, in different states, both times folding the LLC and vanishing before investors could organize a lawsuit. The Scottsdale address belonged to a private high-stakes poker operation that had been quietly investigated by state regulators 2 years earlier, though nothing had ever stuck. Vivian owed money there. Serious money. Money with the kind of interest rate that doesn't show up on any bank's paperwork, the kind you pay in installments to men who don't send you a receipt. And my $800,000 was not the only fund being drained to feed it. Preston, it turned out, held a minor executive title at a mid-sized logistics company, 2 towns over, a company where, 6 months earlier, he had quietly been given signing authority over a portion of the employee retirement fund as a special project, something to do with restructuring the investment vehicle. Harold traced 11 separate transfers, totaling just under $2 million, moving out of that pension fund and into Rosewood Holdings and its sister accounts. Preston wasn't just funding his mother's gambling debt with my money. He was funding it with the retirement savings of hundreds of people who had no idea their futures were being wired to a poker table in Arizona. I sat at my desk and I did not move for a long time. There is a particular kind of anger that doesn't look like anger at all. It settles into your chest like cold water and it makes your hands very, very steady. I had spent 39 years building something honest. I had never once in my life taken a dollar that wasn't earned, and I was not about to let a smooth-talking developer and his mother turn my daughter into a witness to their downfall without giving me the chance to protect her first. But there was something else Harold found, buried in an email thread he'd managed to recover from a server backup, something that told me this wasn't going to end quietly no matter what I did. Preston and Vivian knew the retirement fund theft would eventually get audited. They knew the numbers wouldn't hold past the fiscal year, and they had already started laying groundwork for what would happen when it came apart. In the emails, Preston referred to me, his future father-in-law, as the insurance policy. The plan, as far as Harold could piece it together, was simple and ugly. If the fraud surfaced, Preston intended to claim that the original $800,000 I'd wired had never been an investment at all, that it had been a personal loan directly to him one he'd used at my explicit instruction to help manage family finances, including, conveniently, signing authority over accounts I'd never agreed to. There was a forged authorization letter already drafted, my signature copied from an old real estate closing document, sitting in a folder titled, with a kind of arrogance I still find hard to believe, Walter Backup Plan. They were going to make it look like I was the one who orchestrated the theft, using my own son-in-law as a proxy, while I sat quietly at home congratulating myself on a smart investment. If it ever came to a courtroom, my name, not Vivian's shell company's, would be sitting at the top of the fraud. I called Harold back within the hour. "How fast can we move?" I asked him. "If we needed to move all at once?" "As fast as you need to," he said. "But Walter, you should know there's a company audit already scheduled. 2.5 weeks out. Whatever they're planning it before that audit hits." I told Diane everything that night. Finally, sitting at our kitchen table with the lights low, I watched the color drain out of her face as I laid out the shell companies, the gambling debt, the pension fund, the forged letter with my name on it. She cried. Then she did something I will love her for as long as I live. She wiped her eyes, looked at me, and asked, "What do you need me to do?" I told her I needed her to keep being exactly who she was, warm, trusting, a little slow to catch on to things, if anyone asked. Because if Preston or Vivian suspected for 1 second that either of us knew, the servers would be wiped, and the money would vanish into an account we'd never trace before the sun came up. I needed them to believe they had 2 harmless, aging, generous fools completely under control. So that's exactly what I gave them. I started asking Preston simple questions about the Plaza project, the kind of questions that made him roll his eyes at his mother when he thought I wasn't looking, the kind that let him believe I was just an old man who liked being kept in the loop to feel important. I let him see me get confused about a bank statement once, at dinner, fumbling with my reading glasses, asking Diane twice in 5 minutes what day the wire had gone out. I watched Preston watch me. I watched the relief spread across his face. I watched him lean over and whisper something to Vivian, and this time I heard every word of it. "He's not even paying attention anymore," he said. "This is going to be easier than we thought." Meanwhile, at 2 in the morning, 3 or 4 nights a week, I sat with Harold in his study going through everything, building a case airtight enough that no forged letter and no clever lawyer could unravel it. We traced the wires. We got sworn statements from 2 of Vivian's previous investors in her earlier scams, men in Michigan and Indiana who were only too happy to talk once they realized someone finally believed them. We contacted the logistics company's outside auditor directly, under strict confidentiality, and confirmed independently that the retirement fund shortfall was real and growing. And then, 9 days before the wedding, I set the trap that would end it. I told Preston I wanted to formalize my investment properly, put everything on clean paperwork with my attorney present, just to make Emily comfortable before the wedding. I watched something flicker behind his eyes, some small internal calculation, and then he smiled and said that sounded like a wonderful idea. I think he believed it would give him one more clean shot at making the forged letter look legitimate, one more chance to get my actual signature on something adjacent to the fraud he was planning to pin on me. I drafted a document. It authorized a full independent audit of the Rosewood Holdings partnership for Emily's peace of mind, with language that, buried in paragraph 4, gave my attorney's office temporary authority to review the LLC's banking records directly. I left it sitting on my desk in my home office, unsigned, exactly where Preston would see it if he came looking, which Harold had warned me he would, because a man that desperate does not sleep well, and desperate men go looking for reassurance in the middle of the night. At 1 in the morning, 4 nights before the wedding, the motion light in my driveway clicked on. I watched from my bedroom window as Preston's car pulled in quietly, headlights off. He let himself in with the spare key Emily had given him, the one that hung on a hook by our garage door, and he went straight to my office. I had a small camera, no larger than a shirt button, tucked into the bookshelf behind an old set of encyclopedias Diane's father had left us. I watched the feed from my phone in the dark of our bedroom, my heart steady, my hand steady, Diane's fingers gripping mine so tightly it left marks. We watched Preston sit down at my desk, pick up the unsigned document, read it twice, and then reach into his jacket and pull out a folded piece of paper of his own, the forged authorization letter. He laid it beside mine, comparing the signature lines, practicing something under his breath, testing how my name looked in his own hand on a spare sheet of paper before he committed to anything permanent. It was the clearest evidence I could have asked for. A man forging another man's signature at 1 in the morning in that man's own house. 4 nights later, on the morning of the wedding, I walked Emily down the aisle of a church that had been in my wife's family for 3 generations. I smiled through the entire ceremony. I gave a toast at the reception that made half the room cry, about how proud I was of the woman my daughter had become, about family, about trust, about how far we'd come. Preston shook my hand afterward and told me it meant the world to hear that from me. I told him I meant every word, which was true, though not in the way he understood it. I let them have their first dance. I let them cut the cake. And then, as the band took a short break and the room quieted, I picked up a microphone from the stage, and I asked for everyone's attention. I told the room that before we continued celebrating, there was one more piece of family business I needed to share, because I believe a family should be built on honesty, not on the kind of secrets that eat a person alive from the inside. I watched Preston's smile freeze in place. I watched Vivian's hand tighten around her champagne glass. I told 200 guests about Rosewood Strategic Holdings, a shell company registered in Delaware with no real assets and no real plaza. I told them about the $800,000 I had wired in good faith. Money that never touched a single storefront, money that instead helped feed a gambling debt at a private poker operation under quiet state investigation. I told them about the 6 other shell companies, about the 2 previous investors in Michigan and Indiana who had lost their own savings to this exact scheme years before Preston had ever met my daughter. I watched Vivian's face go the color of the tablecloth. Then I told them about the retirement fund. I told them that nearly $2 million had been quietly siphoned from the pension accounts of hardworking men and women at a logistics company 2 towns over, funneled through Rosewood and its sister accounts to cover Vivian's gambling debts, and that the man responsible for that theft was standing in a rented tuxedo not 20 feet from where I stood. Someone in the crowd gasped audibly. Emily's face had gone completely white. She looked at Preston, and Preston would not look back at her. I told them one final thing, the thing that still makes my jaw tighten when I think about it. I told them that when the fraud was inevitably discovered, Preston and Vivian had already drafted a forged letter, my signature copied from an old document, designed to make it look as though I had personally authorized the theft, so that when everything collapsed, an old man who had built an honest company from nothing would take the fall for a crime committed entirely by the 2 people standing beside him. At that exact moment, right on schedule, 2 men in plain dark suits walked through the doors at the back of the reception hall. Federal investigators, there at my invitation, having reviewed every piece of evidence Harold and I had spent 3 weeks assembling. Vivian saw them first. She bolted for a side exit and made it exactly 4 steps before one of the agents cut her off. She screamed something about lawyers, about her rights, about how nobody understood the pressure she'd been under. Nobody in that room moved to help her. Preston did not run. He simply stood there, still in his rented tuxedo, and watched his entire constructed life collapse in front of every person he'd ever wanted to impress. Emily turned to him, tears streaming down a face still done up in wedding makeup, and asked him if any of it was true. He didn't answer her. That silence was the only answer she needed. The agents took statements that night, quietly, in the church's side room, while the reception dissolved into stunned, whispered chaos around them. Formal charges followed within the week: wire fraud, embezzlement from an employee retirement fund, and for Preston specifically, forgery and conspiracy. Given what the camera in my office had captured 4 nights before the wedding, Vivian was denied bail. The prosecutor called her a significant flight risk, citing the 2 prior schemes in other states and an offshore account Harold had traced in the final days of his investigation. Preston's bail was set high enough that no one in his life was willing to post it. Emily filed for an annulment 11 days after the wedding. She did not speak to Preston again. She moved back into her childhood bedroom for 2 months, and some nights I would hear her crying through the wall, and I would sit outside her door, not saying anything, just letting her know I was there. Diane and I never once said "we told you so," because we never had told her so. Not really. Not until the moment it mattered. I went to the logistics company myself, 2 weeks after the wedding, and stood in front of every employee whose retirement savings had been stolen. I did not sugarcoat it. I told them exactly what had happened, exactly how much was missing, and exactly what I intended to do about it, because those pension dollars belonged to people who had done nothing wrong except trust a man in a suit. I personally guaranteed restitution for every dollar taken, funded out of my own retirement portfolio, and within 3 weeks, every account had been made whole. I did not do it for credit. I did it because a man who spends 39 years building something honest does not get to watch it get used as a weapon against working people and call himself blameless for standing by. Vivian pled guilty 8 months later to avoid a trial that would have gone even worse for her. She is currently serving a federal sentence upstate. Preston fought the charges for nearly a year, insisting through 2 different attorneys that he was manipulated by his mother, that he never fully understood what the money was being used for, a defense that fell apart the moment the prosecution played the footage of him practicing my forged signature at my own desk at 1 in the morning. He is serving 6 years. It was almost a year later, on a cold November night, when the doorbell rang well past midnight. I opened the door to find Preston standing on my porch. He had been released early on a technicality tied to overcrowding, out for less than a week, already thin, already hollowed out in a way that 18 months in a cell does to a man who used to move through the world so easily. He had nowhere else to go. His mother's assets were seized. His own accounts were frozen pending restitution orders. He stood there in the cold and asked me, his voice cracking, if he could just sleep in the garage for one night. I looked at the man who had tried to hand my life's work to a stranger with a gambling problem, who had planned, in cold and deliberate writing, to let an innocent old man take the blame for his crimes. And I told him the same thing I have told everyone who has asked me since that night at the reception hall. I built everything I have on the belief that a person's word means something, that family means showing up for each other honestly, even when honesty costs you. Preston never believed that. Not for one single day I knew him. And consequences, I told him. Standing in my own doorway with my wife's hand on my shoulder, consequences are not something a family absorbs on your behalf. They are something a man carries alone, exactly as far as his choices carried him. I closed the door. I heard him standing there for a long while afterward, and then I heard him walk away. Diane and I still live in the same house we raised Emily in. Emily has started rebuilding her life, slowly, on her own terms, and she tells us now, more than she ever did before, exactly what's going on in her world, because trust, once it's been tested and rebuilt from the ground up, tends to come back stronger than it started. If there is one thing I would want any parent watching this to carry with them, it is this. Love your children with everything you have, but never let that love make you blind to the people they choose to bring into your family. The truth always finds its way to the surface eventually. The only question is whether you are the one who uncovers it, or the one left standing in the wreckage when it finally does. Love isn't proven by how much you're willing to hand over, it's proven by how honestly it's returned. Sometimes protecting the people we love means asking hard questions before writing the check, not after. Trust should still be given freely, but it grows strongest when it's paired with clear eyes, patience, and the quiet courage to face the truth, even when it hurts. A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI purely for entertainment, though we hope its message about trust and honesty still lands somewhere real in your heart.